So, good afternoon. As you know, the royal visit has been positively received by New Zealanders right around the country. For many, it's been the chance of a lifetime, I think, to catch a glimpse of the royal couple. I've seen firsthand how much it's meant to people young and old to be part of the generous Kiwi welcome. And of course, the focus of more than 120 international reporters and photographers means that the pictures and stories of New Zealand are being beamed around the world as the royal tour is reported overseas. As Tourism Minister, I know how valuable that is. Tourism New Zealand put together a program to support and motivate the media to produce stories that showcased New Zealand as an international holiday destination. They provided footage and images that media could use in preview stories before the tour even began, hosted them at events showcasing New Zealand's food and wine, and gave them the opportunity to enjoy some of the iconic tourism experiences the royal couple didn't have time to enjoy. The international media have commented that this is the first time for any royal tour that a national tourism organisation has provided them with a tailored program. Today the focus for the royal tour has been on Christchurch with earthquake memorial events in the city. The final day of the tour is Wednesday, when the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge will have visits in Wellington before heading off to Australia. I'm sure New Zealanders will join me in wishing them well on the remainder of their journey. Tomorrow, Finance Minister Bill English will give a pre-budget speech to the Wellington Chamber of Commerce. As you know, we remain on track to reach a slim surplus for 2014-15, then growing in the following years when we will be able to start reducing some of the debt that was built up during the recession. We're focused on creating sustainable growth that will extend the recovery and provide a strong platform for more jobs and higher wages. It's important we achieve this without pushing interest rates up higher than they otherwise would need to be. That means sticking to our around about $1 billion new spending allowance in the coming year. Keeping to this new spending limit means we've been able to invest more in health, education and families, but at the same time post a surplus. And in future budgets, we need to remain disciplined. A big spending increase in the future would ramp up pressure on inflation, and interest rates would rise higher and faster than they otherwise would have to. Nationally, government will continue the considered approach that has guided us through the worst recession in 30 years, and will soon see us out of the red and back into the black. Final details about the Genesis IPO will be out probably on Wednesday ahead of its listing on Thursday. As you know, when it lists, that will be the end of our share offer program, which has been a success and met every objective we set for the program. On Thursday, I'll visit Christchurch and give a breakfast speech about the rebuild of the city. As you know, I visit Christchurch regularly and attend various events related to the recovery and rebuild. It's pleasing to see the progress being made, and I'll be reflecting on that on Thursday. Finally, in terms of my other activities this week, I'll be in the House for Question Time on Tuesday and Wednesday. As I mentioned, on Thursday I'll be giving a speech in Christchurch, and then of course there's Easter during the weekend. The government will progress a number of bills in the House this week, including the Vulnerable Children Bill, the Victims of Crime Reform Bill, and the Victims Order Against Violent Offenders Bill. On Thursday morning we'll have extended hours to progress treaty settlement legislation.
Prime Minister, have you been made aware of the issues to do with the ACC 167 form? That's the privacy consent form that every New Zealander signs when they go along to ACC.
No, I'm sorry, I don't have any details on that.
Well, on the issue of home affordability, Nick Smith said yesterday that there's a target of the median house prices being about 4 times median income, and that it may take a couple of decades to hit that target. Is that an acceptable time frame for the average Kiwi who's trying to get into a house and is worried about affordability to have to consider?
Well, I don't think he means that you won't be able to get into a house because the unaffordability, we're higher up the unaffordability index, if you like, than that. But I think what he's indicating is that it's not one single thing, and it's quite a long-term problem. I mean, we do need to release more land. Ultimately, the consents need in our major cities, we'll have to build up more. There's a number of other areas where they're working or looking at all of those issues. But I think, housing is an issue that's been around for a very long period of time. As I said, I think on the radio this morning, house prices doubled under Labour in the 9 years they were in office. They've gone up about 24% in the time that we've been there, but they're starting to escalate now as the recession fades away and the economy feels stronger and better. So there's just no simple silver bullet to this problem.
Do you think it's credible, therefore, to target 4 when it's currently 7 in Auckland, which would imply either a fall in prices or flat prices for a couple of decades?
Well, I think it's unlikely there'll be falling prices. In my view is that what you're likely to see is a flattening out of those increases. I mean, the government's view is, modest increases in house prices make sense. Rapidly escalating prices aren't good for anyone. They're actually not good for existing homeowners because in the end they're likely to create a bubble. They're certainly not good for those trying to get into the market.
The opposition just says that you're just ignoring the demand issues, and you could tackle foreign non-residents buying houses and of course capital gains tax and hit speculators.
Yeah, but the problem is there already is a capital gains tax for speculators. I mean, David Cunnell's been pretty disingenuous there when he claims that there isn't. There already is one there. And we actually spend quite a considerable amount of money enforcing that, and IRD's been very successful at bringing to account those that haven't paid their tax liability when they otherwise should do. In terms of foreigners buying, I think we all accept there's not great data there, but in terms of the data that we do have, it doesn't again support the view that it would do much. I mean, the sales are going to offshore as best that we can measure that. When you take out the exemptions Labor are talking about, there's maybe about 2%, and they're happening from existing foreign owners already. So even Tony Alexander himself said the net difference would be about flat. Australia's put in place some of the provisions that Labor's talking about, and they've got a worse problem than we've got, and they've got a bigger capital gains tax than we've got, and they've got a worse problem. So those things don't fix the problem. In the end, it's a supply side issue, not a demand side issue.
But isn't this problem going to get even bigger as China opens up its capital account and our relations with China get even deeper?
Well, I don't think it'll matter in terms of our relationship with China. I mean, they may over time look to invest more, but there's plenty of places where they're arguably looking to invest rather than necessarily in New Zealand. You'll see some investment from overseas. You have in residential property, but I don't think it's extreme by any stretch of the imagination at this point.
On the capital gains tax though, so for a baby boomer couple, for example, who have got a second home and they've had it for the last 5 or 6 years, they've made $100 grand in Auckland, are you saying they'll pay a capital gain tax?
No, what I'm saying is if someone buys a property to speculate, so it's all about intent, the current rules. If their intention is to buy the property to make a capital gain or then ultimately or develop that in such a way, then they're subject to capital gains tax. If they buy it with the intention of renting it, then they're not. But the IRD tests those provisions. If people seem to be buying and selling houses regularly, then they'll certainly be caught by IRD.
Do you have any idea of the number of people that have been caught by that and how much they've paid?
I don't have them with me, but we can certainly get them for you. But it's I think hundreds of millions of dollars now.
Since when, sorry?
I'll have to give you exact details, but I know that there's been a considerable increase in the amount of tax that IRD have claimed back, and there's been a huge amount of energy and effort put into those that IRD believe are actually in fact speculating, because they're therefore subject to a capital gains tax they haven't paid for.
So this is IRD chasing people and identifying them as...
And they've been doing that considerably. And if you look in previous budgets, you will have seen there's been allocations for IRD to have more money for people or for inspectors to go and dig deeper in these types of areas, and it's been very successful.
What would be the challenge with extending that to rental properties? Why not make it more rental?
Oh, well, you could do it, but I mean, as I said, it doesn't stop unaffordability issues. Australia has that, and the major cities are all more unaffordable, pretty much from what I can see, than Auckland. Secondly, it's likely if you accept that someone who buys a rental property is looking to make an average return on their investment, then all it's likely to do is put up rental prices. So I don't think it's likely to have a huge impact either on affordability, may put up prices.
If we don't have good data on foreign ownership of housing and land, for example, why not try and get some good data on it so we can see if there's a problem?
Yep, I think that's a credible argument to see whether we should start collecting more of that data. It's not as straightforward as I said last week. It depends on the structure that someone's buying that property in. It depends on what their intentions are. There are lots and lots of intentions, but on the best sort of data that we can see, much of which is anecdotal, the majority of offshore buyers who buy a property in New Zealand buy it because there is a fairly close connection in New Zealand. They intend to immigrate here, they have a family member living here, all of those types of things, all of which boost the economy in lots of other forms. I mean, I don't think that is the big driving factor. I mean, the big driving factor has been that, in particular, Auckland, Christchurch has its own set of circumstances around the rebuild, but in Auckland, the number of consented properties, sections and houses has been far too small relative to the demand, and Auckland's population is rising, both because of external and internal migration.
Just in terms of the complications of having a register of that type, the overseas investment regime gets around those, does it not?
Yes, but that requires a filing mechanism, and it's above certain criteria. So I think it's above, it's for sensitive land or above a certain nominal value. There are lots of different complications there, and as I said to you, there might be quite a lot of ways that people can circumvent that process if they wanted to.
Do you see housing as an election issue, that the affordability debate is something that your opponents perhaps think you're weak on?
Well, I think they're particularly weak. So, I'm not actually that bothered. If they want to have a debate about it, I'll be more than happy to remind New Zealanders that house prices doubled under Labour, interest rates went through the roof under Labour, they failed to reform the system under Labour, they allowed large development contributions under Labour, they didn't actually change the building regulation to make it more streamlined under Labour, they never had special housing accords as we did under Labour, and they were opposed to the RMA. So if David Culliford wants to have a bit of chat on Nationwide TV about it, I'm more than happy to do so.
We'll see if we can organise it for you.
Yeah, well, called the first debate, and we're looking forward to it.
Would you consider maybe a cap on foreign ownership of the housing stock? Say, they foreigners that don't live in here can't buy a house under $1 million or $1.5 million.
Well, there hasn't been the view that we've taken that that's been necessary at this point. As I said to you, I don't think that data is terribly good, but on the best anecdotal data we can get, at best about 2% of purchases might come into that category. And of those, there are many foreign owners who already own a house in New Zealand who also sell properties. So Tony Alexander, who seems to monitor this stuff as good as anybody else, his argument is at the moment it might be net square in terms of purchases and sales.
Just coming back to my first question, I know you're unaware of this issue to do with the ACC form, but the gist is this: ACC, the form that everyone has to sign when they go there, a court judge has found
To work there or
to get a claim.
Oh, right, yeah.
A judge has found that form is actually in question whether they've got the authority. It's essentially a privacy waiver. Does that concern you that there's been this issue to do with privacy at an organisation that has had so many problems?
Well, in the end, when people go to ACC, they often have to, give personal information, clearly as a result of their claim. Those forms will need to be right. If there's been some ruling by the courts that they may be in breach, then they'll need to go and ensure that they are either resolving that issue or that they are legally correct in the actions they're currently taking. But I don't have any information on that. Often you'll get rulings by courts as part of the kind of evolution of jurisprudence that means that organisations need to change. If they need to change, then they'll have to do that.
This was an issue that was brought up as part of that major review in the wake of Bronwyn Pilla. Are you concerned that it hasn't been dealt with, now ended up to the courts having to do something about it, was actually there and put to the minister?
Well, often it's the courts that will determine whether they believe something like this meets the law or not. Parliament sets the rules, the courts administer the rules. So, look, in the end, I just don't have details on that. If there's something that ACC needs to resolve to ensure that it's within the law, then I expect them to go and resolve it.
Is this something you need to find out from the minister about? I mean, this is the form that every person, if you had an accident tomorrow, you'd have to sign it yourself. Is this something you need to go and find out from?
Well, it hasn't been raised with me. You're raising it with me now. I'm more than happy to have a look at it, but I don't have any details on it.
In the last week, local government New Zealand has called for a review of how councils raise money, and they want to broaden out and start raising money from sales taxes or payroll taxes or congestion charges. Yep. What's your view on whether that's something that should be done?
Generally speaking, we're opposed to that. I mean, our view is that it's the purview of central government to be able to raise taxes in those forms, and that local government can raise its revenue either through rates or where there's a special levy that's appropriately applied, like a development contribution. I mean, my concern would be if you started seeing ad hoc bed taxes and sales taxes and all sorts of other things being applied by local government, then they would naturally add cost to the economy and just make us less competitive. And we'd need to see a really good justification for why they need so much extra revenue that they can't currently raise through the rating base.
because they argue that as the population ages, there'll be more asset-rich, income-poor people having to pay the rates on their properties, and that they need to invest in infrastructure, and that they'll need some.
Yeah, I think it's a bit rich. I mean, at the end of the day, there are plenty of mechanisms for dealing with that. They can have a leaning or, against property. For instance, they can defer taking their rates. They can have reverse mortgages. There are plenty of ways they could essentially extract their pound of flesh, but take that at a time where cash flow is not so much of a problem.
Prime Minister, Judith Collins, after about 3 weeks of answering questions on her Beijing dinner,
Yep.
decided that the dinner was not a ministerial matter and she had ministerial responsibility for it. Private dinner and refused to answer questions. The Speaker sort of obviously found that unsatisfactory. He said so. What's your view on it?
Well, it's a matter for the Speaker. He determines whether something's within the responsibility of the Minister or not.
Do you know who this official, do you know who the official was?
Well, I've seen the name at some point, but I can't tell you the name. It means anything to me. It's a Chinese official.
And do you know the department?
Yeah, I know the department, yeah.
What?
Well, we don't believe there's any merit in going through that. I mean, if you look at the Cabinet Office advice to us, it was quite clear. The advice said the cumulative effect of the various meetings that she held led to the perception of a conflict of interest. I think we've made it clear, that this person is a Chinese official, and that they were involved in an agency in China. But outside of that, it doesn't add anything to releasing the name. It was a private dinner, and then this person came as a friend of Stone She. So in our view, it doesn't add anything to release the name. And people wouldn't normally expect to have their name released at a private dinner.
What about the department, though? Like, why?
Again, I just don't think it adds anything to the
Is
overall
it a
dinner.
department that's been to New Zealand? Because sometimes those China border patrol agencies come here.
Well, I'm just not going to bother going into sort of 20 questions in the end. I just don't think it adds anything to it.
Have you
Prime
released
Minister,
it? Will it worsen or
after
lessen it?
your Chief of Staff spoke with Ms Collins a few weeks back, she said that in retrospect, in hindsight, she should have put the details of the dinner in the report to Cabinet. She told Parliament last week that in reflection she looked at the Cabinet manual and she shouldn't have. She's performed quite a spectacular U-turn there. What do you make of that?
Well, that's a matter for her.
Have you asked her why she's changed her mind on it?
No,
Are you going to?
no,
Why not?
don't need to.
Would it increase or decrease the perception of conflict of interest if you were to release that official's name and
Oh, not necessarily, but look, at the end of it wouldn't change anything. I mean, it's not germane to the overall conversation. We made it quite clear when we found out about the dinner and that this person was there, even though it was a private dinner, even though they were a friend of Stone She, we thought it was important that people understood that. But the actual name doesn't really make a difference. As I said to you, when you asked me some questions about this, weeks and weeks ago, it would be no different from me going to a dinner on Saturday night where someone comes along and they work for another government agency in New Zealand. People have a private capacity and they have a public capacity. This was a private dinner, but this person works for one of these agencies, and in my view it was important that people understood that.
we're talking about a perception, though, surely it will have an impact.
The name of the agency doesn't add anything to the perception. There's either a perception of a conflict or interest or there isn't. In the view of the Cabinet Office, the cumulative effect means that there is.
What's
What's
on
view
the
on
menu?
the calling Arroyo National Trust ban and noted affairs from the press conference?
Generally not a sensible thing to do. I mean, in my view, they receive considerable amount of government funding and they should be held to account and scrutiny like any other agency that receives money.
The
What's on the-
trust also said that they didn't want any government intrusion into their affairs. Do you think that the letter that Kekia Parata and Peter Sharple sent to them amounts to intrusion by the government?
I don't. There are still open questions about the spending of the subsidiary. It's yet to be determined, I think, fully, where that funding came from. Although we can see overall that the main funding from the subsidiary or to the subsidiary comes from Karen O'Reilly, but I think it's a bit uncertain. But there are a number of agencies looking at that, the Charities Commission, I think, and on top of that, the SFO are considering whether they're going to look at the matter. That's the appropriate thing to happen. They should determine whether there's some sort of inappropriate behaviour or not.
And I presume you would want to delay negotiation on a treaty claim until you're satisfied with that the Porting Arroyo is restructured into a democratic organisation.
That's right. I mean, our view is that they have to be accountable and responsible for the government funding that they receive. And we have made it clear and will be continuing to make it clear what our expectations are.
The initial inquiry into that spending found there was enough evidence to that board member to be sacked. Do you think, given that it did, that charges should have been made?
It's not for me to determine that. As I said to you, ultimately what I prefer is the full information, and we don't have the full information in terms of the subsidiary. But if the SFO decide to look at it, we will. And when the Charities Commission does its work, we will.
What's on the menu for the North Royals tonight?
Very much in Showcase New Zealand, so a mixture of sort of appetizers, but sort of bluff oysters and whitebait and things like that. Main course is rack lamb or snapper, and the dessert is pavlova with hokey pokey ice cream. Quintessentially Kiwi.
How long do you think you'll have with them?
A few hours, I would have thought.
So who else is going?
Yeah, well, there's literally just the five of us. Max, myself, and William and Kate.
Steffi hasn't come over for a Balmoral reunion.
But busy with exams at the moment.
And no George?
Don't think so, but there'd obviously be a welcome invitation to him, but I'm pretty sure